Hello, and welcome to the Living Her Legacy Woman of Fort Collins interview series. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Phillips. The Living Her Legacy project began from an idea that inspired Patty Smith to create a community that recognizes, supports, and empowers girls and women. The project is to create the first highly visible public outdoor historic art and education exhibit commemorating prominent women in Fort Collins. We are excited to introduce the 48 Living Her Legacy honorees who represent a vast range of fields from professional sports, arts and culture, advocates and activists, education, entrepreneurs and innovators, leadership, public service, suffragists, and volunteers. In this series, you will hear from friends, family, and the honorees themselves and learn about their passion, motivation, and be inspired by the impact they have made in our community. Today, you will meet Denise Burson Freestone. She co-founded OpenStage Theatre and Company with her husband, Bruce, while they were students at Colorado State University. She established OpenStage Theatre to create a space where ethnic, social, and religious boundaries dissolve in the joy of performing. OpenStage Theatre received prestigious awards over the years, including the Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts and the Colorado Henry Award for Outstanding Season in 2017, the first time a Northern Colorado company has received this coveted title. Welcome, Denise, and thanks for being here.
It's just a joy to be here. Thank you, Natalie.
So I'd like to start off at the beginning.
Mhm.
Can you share a brief summary of your upbringing and maybe your background and what you do?
Well, I was born in Denver, Colorado in 1949, where I grew up in Southeast Denver. I discovered my love of theater as a teenager, which led me to pursue a Bachelor of Art in Theater at Colorado State University, where I met my husband, Bruce. And then, as you said, we co-founded OpenStage Theatre and Company in 1973 and have continued to pursue that passion throughout the decades.
Awesome. And I heard a rumor, but when you thought your husband's idea to open a theater was insane, what
Yes,
changed your mind and allowed you to forge ahead anyway?
I'm not sure I've ever changed my mind. It is insane, but it's also a passion, and we have often referred to Open Stage Theater as our third child, the one that is not breathing on its own. Although I have to admit, over the last decade or so, it actually is living without life support and much more independently than it did in all those early years.
But it's still standing, especially after COVID.
Yes, it's still standing, especially after COVID. What a
Yes.
challenge that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what do you see as the primary personality traits that allow a woman to achieve her goals and live her passion?
Well, over the years, I have had so many opportunities in pursuit of my theater habit. I've had to have many other professional jobs to bring money into the family. And one of the things that I was able to do was serve as the assistant director of the Institute for Women and Leadership at Colorado State University under the direction of Dr. Elnora Guilfoyle, who is also one of my major mentors in my life. She taught me so much. I learned so much from her about not only leadership and gender cultures, which is a term I believe she initially coined, but also just how to be an exceptional human being. And one of the things that we did in that institute when I worked for her is we used the Leadership Challenge, which is a leadership development program based on the book by Barry Posner and James Kouzes. And I say this because they came up with 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And these practices have been a touchstone for me over the last 25, 30 years. And not only professionally, but also personally and in my family life. And I want to share those 5 practices because I think they're phenomenal. And these researchers are very well respected for their work. And the practices are creating a shared vision, modeling the way, challenging the system, enabling others to act, and encouraging the heart. The reason I bring those up here is not just because if you are a leader, these 5 practices should be developed in the way you lead your followers, but also personally, individually, privately. If you know your vision and you model your vision in your daily life, you challenge the way that you see the world, you enable yourself to act, and you encourage your own heart. I also encourage young women to find their own truth. And I don't say that lightly because pursuing truth is not an easy journey. It demands that we challenge ourselves and our beliefs at every turn. And as I've traveled that road of pursuing my truth and my passion, I found 5 principles that have really helped me value myself and others and the world, and also keep myself honest and grounded. And whenever I come back to these principles, I always find myself much more in tune with who I am and how I'm moving through the world. And those principles are joy, peace, compassion, love, gratitude, and appreciation. And these are not just for other people, but also for ourselves. When I think about compassion for ourselves, gratitude for who we are, and appreciation of who we are. So I just, for young women, know what brings you joy, and then conquer or address all those incredible challenges that you need to meet to live your joy and your passion. Don't let yourself become discouraged. Well, you will become discouraged, but come back to yourself, come back to your joy, and come back to your love, and reassess. You're always reassessing. Nothing ever looks like you think it's going to.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I love that. So I've got a question for you. Of those 5 practices that you shared early on from the book, what was one that may have been easier for you to adopt or practice? And what was one that was difficult for you to adopt and practice?
It's so interesting that you ask me that, because when we first started working with this model in the Institute for Women in Leadership, they have a survey instrument where you survey yourself, who you work for, who are equal to you, and who work underneath you. And through this research instrument, they assess these 5 different practices. And because I was in the Institute and we did this every year with a select group of women in various professional arenas at CSU, I was able to do it 3 different times. And the first time I did it, everybody I did it with had ranked me way up at the top. And I ranked myself way down at the bottom. And the next time, I ranked myself more along the middle road, but I was still ranked way up at the top. The third time I did it, I was very much up where people had me. And that's where I really was able to see where I needed to spend some energy to improve. I had no trouble challenging the system. I'm a rebel. I've always been a rebel. I really had no trouble encouraging the heart and enabling others to act. But the idea of creating a shared vision, as much as that is what I had been doing, we had been doing an OpenStage, I hadn't thought about it that in those terms. And it's not that because I was thinking everybody just will, accept this vision that we have for OpenStage Theater, but that's not what creating a shared vision is. What it is creating a vision that other people can see themselves reaching their goals by embracing your vision. That sort of turned that whole idea on the head for me. The other thing I hadn't thought, which is just amazing for me to think about now, is that everything I did was modeling the way. And I really had to think about that. What are the characteristics I'm modeling? What are the characteristics that I'm modeling that I don't want to model, that I want to change in myself? So I would say those were the 2 primary challenges, but it took me about 3 years to even comprehend that. And then I have used these practices continually since that time.
I love that. I love that. I think you and I are similar, because I do have no problem challenging the system as well. But I do see what you're saying with the vision, the shared vision. And I love that you shared that too, because as girls or women that are watching this and are learning about you legacy honorees, I think what's interesting is when there's a lot of talk about vision nowadays, even now. So back in your day, right? Back even right now with young girls becoming leaders, there's so much talk about vision. And it's very centered around the vision that they want to become. But I love the point that you shared, that even though it was your vision, a shared vision, that's the key word, right? Is the shared vision, is that you take your vision, but it's how does what you do and bring to this world and your plan and your idea and then your future impact, right? How does it touch somebody so that they can jump on board with your vision and it's aligned with who and what they want to be, right?
Right.
So I think that that's really interesting. I do love the piece as well as just who are you modeling, right? Because you're modeling all the time. And like you said, OpenStage was your 3rd baby. And it is like having a parent or being a parent-child type of relationship where you kind of have to watch what you're modeling, what you're not modeling, and what is it that you're putting out in this world. So I absolutely love that point as well, and how you learned. And so for the people that are tuning in and watching this interview and learning about you, I think that it's such great advice, because you have to remember that everything that you do, you're modeling for somebody, right? Somebody's watching. I tell that to my kids too, and my daughter is, somebody's always watching, or somebody's going to learn from you. So I love the modeling and what you learned from it.
And that's so true. But I think we fall into the error of believing that means that we always have to do everything correctly.
Oh yeah, true.
And I completely disagree with that.
Right.
I think that we're all human. So we have to embrace not just our strengths, but also our
Mhm.
weaknesses and accept them. That was part of that compassion,
Mhm.
having compassion for ourselves. And when we have compassion for our foibles and our
Mhm.
very human weaknesses, it gives us the opportunity to truly have compassion for other people's
Mhm.
mistakes and errors, and forgive so much easier. And you have to be able to forgive other people to create a shared vision.
Yeah. I love that point. I'm glad you said that too, because, modeling and somebody's always watching you can give the wrong impression that you have to be perfect, right? And you have to
Oh,
do everything correct. And somebody's always watching you. So you have to have a mask on and you have
what
to
a
make sure that
str-
everything's correct. Yeah. So I
right.
love that you brought that up
What a
because that's not
straitjacket
what it
that is.
is.
Who wants to live in that
Exactly. Yeah.
straitjacket? And as an artist, artists cannot live in that emotional straitjacket.
Hmm.
That you
Yeah.
cannot be creative when you
Hmm.
live in that world where your God is making a mistake.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. All right, Denise. Next question is what motivates you?
Ever since I can remember, and this is going all the way back to when I'm like 1 and 2 years old, communicating, I speak in these words now, but having that communication with people and feeling like I was part of an accepted part of a community has always driven me.
Mm,
Um, and part of that is because I so passionately wanted it and didn't feel like I had it in my life.
hmm,
And so so many of the things that I have done in my life, and in fact, virtually everything I've done in my life, has been to try to develop mutual understanding with other people through communication. It has failed so many times, and it is so frustrating, and it hurts my heart when that happens. But I have to remember to celebrate the times when it works. And
mm,
just because I have had a miscommunication with someone does not mean, not only does it not mean that we can learn to communicate, but some of my most valuable and precious relationships are with people that I have had major conflicts with.
mm,
And when we have worked it out together and come to accept each other and forgive each other and value each other, then there's this whole rich world that we have together.
mm.
And that's the basis of what I personally wanted to build an open stage theater, not only my passion for the art, but that community of artists where we're creating together. Um, and also the fact that live theater is the perfect, it's communion between the artist and the audience. The thing I first loved about it when I stumbled into live theater when I was 13 was that you got to rehearse interactions. You got to know where you were and what you wanted to do. Now everything changes because theater only lives in the moment. But what a joy that is. And then when you feel the audience with you in
Mhm,
those moments, uh, you come to realize that they're not just passively sitting there uh, with the pleasure and privilege of watching your art unfold. They're creating it with you.
mhm,
And every moment is different, every audience is different, and you feel them, you know them, and they move with you, and
mm.
you respond to them. It's still the same play, it's still the same performance, but the nuances are phenomenal.
Yeah. And you summed it up perfectly with your word communion. I love that. It's the communion between the artist or who's on stage and the audience together.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. And I absolutely love that. Although you've won many awards that I had mentioned before, and many more besides the ones that I've mentioned, and were successful, did you have any obstacles along the way? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Well, I'm not sure you ever totally overcome obstacles. Your first obstacle is yourself. What you believe about yourself. We are capable of so much more than what we believe ourselves capable of doing. The world is so much more magical than we've come to accept it as being, because this is what we've learned growing up. But when we come to understand ourselves a little more and let our world get larger, then these obstacles actually truly become opportunities to grow. But one of the major obstacles, just besides the fact that funding in the arts is always going to be a crisis mode. I don't care how large your organization is and how well funded by donors, it's always a challenge. And part of that is because creatives just always have more that they want to do. But part of it is just the physical world of live theater, all the things you have to put together. It's in the early years, especially, it was like pulling teeth. Where are we going to find the resources to do what we want to do? So that's definitely a huge obstacle that we have to overcome. But for OpenStage Theater specifically, we started this in 1973. So this was, and Bruce and I met at CSU in 1968. So if you put that in historical terms, that's right during the countercultural movements. And I was not initially a hippie. He was definitely a hippie when we first met. I was the president of Panhellenic, which some of you may know is the head of the sorority system at the university at CSU. And so I had been walking a very different path. We were both in the theater department, which was a small department, very intimate. And I had been so intrigued by what was happening on the national scale of all these conversations about the war, of course, civil rights, so many different things. And I finally said, I need to go over here and see what is actually going on. What is actually happening over here? And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? And I went, well, I've always been enamored of Bruce Freestone. I had a crush on him ever since the first moment I saw him on stage. So I'm just going to use him as my gateway to this world. And actually, I want to refer specifically to some of the things about the countercultural movement that I think were really important. It was the late 60s, early 70s. Hippies rejected established institutions, criticized middle-class values, opposed nuclear weapons and the Vietnam War, championed civil and women's rights, initiated the environmental movement, embraced aspects of Eastern philosophy, believed in expanding one's consciousness, and also created intentional communities, which were better known as communes. So that energy was visceral at CSU and across the nation at that point in time. And the community that grew up around that in Fort Collins was vibrant. Now, of course, it was a very large community in that smaller theater community, but a larger community throughout Fort Collins. And so when we founded OpenStage Theater in 1973, we were supported not only by a small group of CSU theater students, but also by this larger countercultural community. some of the things that we were involved with, that community did, besides creating OpenStage Theater, was there were key members in Fort Collins who created the Colorado environmental movement, establishing the first free medical and legal clinics in Fort Collins, starting the food co-op, which was the first time that we were able to get organic fare in the Fort Collins community. And these are just a few of the things that countercultural community was involved in. And so many of those things we just think of as a right now, as something that we should offer. Although I will say it is all being challenged very avidly at this point in time. But these were not normally accepted parts of a community. The idea of racial justice or equality for women. I mean, it just environmental justice. I mean, these were foreign. Obviously, the civil rights movement had been around for a while, but it was still struggling. We're still struggling with these things. But I remember first hearing about women's rights. And it was later. It was actually so much later than this. It was probably 1973. Our oldest daughter, Jessica, was a year old. And I heard Gloria Steinem. And it was like, holy mackerel, I get to say what I want. I get to stand up for what I want. I don't have to just take care of everybody else around me. That was a lightning moment for me. And my work at CSU, which included not only equality for women and gender studies, but also diversity studies overall throughout the campus. As women, even today, because let's face it, we only got the right to vote just over 100 years ago, 1920. One of the last world leaders, First Nation countries to vote, to allow women to have the right to vote. One of the last. We are still taught to sacrifice ourselves for others, for the family, the good of others. And historically, in our gender culture, we have given up our power in the outer world. Now, I am not one to, I no longer believe in the innate wrong of being male. I think men have, in order to survive in their male gender culture, had to give up their power in their inner life. And quite frankly, if I had to choose between giving up power in the outer world and giving up my inner life, I would give up power in the outer world without even batting an eye. But the point is, we should not have to. And so we've become more and more empowered to act in the larger canvas of life. And men are becoming more and more empowered to be able to have an inner life. The mere idea of a husband staying home to take care of their children while the wife pursued a professional career was so foreign. It's still a challenge for those men, but I mean, it was unheard of. And to talk about having a job that spoke to your heart was a concept that didn't even come into vaguely thinking about until the mid-1990s. Before that, it was all, artsy-fartsy, hoo-ha kind of thoughts. So we've grown so far, but we still have so far to go in empowering ourselves and defending ourselves and protecting ourselves,
Mhm.
because we still, as women, we need to protect ourselves.
I love that. I love the history and as well that you shared, because I think that many people, even in the younger generations, may not know all of that and
Mhm.
have that firsthand account of you living it out, right? And even how certain things have changed in history, that some things still remain.
Mhm.
And we were a household at one point in our house and marriage where I was the primary breadwinner and my husband had to stay home with the kids. So listening to you, share even back in the day, you're right, where it wasn't as accepted or easy, or taking a job that spoke to your heart and
Right.
your passion. Why is it only now for women? It's also for men as well, where
Exactly.
they shouldn't have to go to a job necessarily just to make the money. What if they have a passion for something as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How
Hmm.
miserable is that?
Yep.
Ugh.
Yep. Yep.
Oh,
I love that perspective that you just shared, because it makes a lot of sense.
I I think in the early years of OpenStage, we did not have ageism. We were a younger company, but within 10 years or so, um, we had people working with us from preteens to people in their 90s. And I think that's hard to find
Hmm.
nowadays.
Hmm.
Um, our social media, I think, really puts us in age groups a lot, and it breaks my heart because uh, there are we have different stages in life,
Hmm.
and I think young people in their late teens or their teens and their 20s especially, their stage is to challenge everything around them because they don't really get what consequences mean yet.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
haven't, and so they have the energy and they have the drive and they have the clarity to just challenge everything. But then as you get older, there's other things that you bring to the picture of just what things work, how things work, and ways that you can do things.
Hmm.
I do not believe that older people should be dictating to younger people how they should do things.
Hmm.
But I would love to have younger people come to older people and say, "What did you find work? Do
Hmm.
you have do you have recommendations or ideas for me?"
Hmm.
And then the older person, what they do is say, "This is what worked for me. Here it is.
Yep.
Take
Yep.
it."
Well, it goes back to your point. It's the communication, the conversation, the communion between even two ages, right? As
Right.
long as, like when you said social media ages us, however, if we had that communication, that communion between ages, right,
Mhm.
then it wouldn't be, because with this openness and the communication that we can have, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm in the middle age stage, but I can communicate with
Right.
maybe people that are older, and that's what I love, because I'm a connection person. So I love to learn from whatever age, right? And
Mhm.
and I'm gleaning all the wisdom that you're sharing in this interview, but at the same time, the younger generation, for me, I don't just sit and go, "Oh, pshaw," like,
Yeah.
I'm never gonna learn what they're doing. Like,
When
I'm
I
like,
was a
"Show
kid.
me, please. Like, show me, please. I want to be involved in this, and I wanna keep up," and you have that, and you start that's what it is. It's starting the conversation and having that openness to have that communication. I think it's huge. Whether it's in the theater, whether it's in a business, whether
Right.
it's just sitting here having a conversation. So I think that those are wise words, and,
Well, and I just wanna speak to where you are. Oh, what an incredible time of life when you start figuring things out.
mhm.
And I remember in, w my 30s, I went, "Phew, well, thank God I'm not in my 20s anymore." And my 40s was, okay, well, this makes more sense. And my 50s, it was like I was having success. I was understanding what worked and
Mhm.
what didn't work and how things, I was still having challenges all over the place, but I had much more of a sense of myself and that I wasn't going to just crash and burn, that I was going to survive.
Mhm. Yeah, I love it. In your many accomplishments, what do you feel has been your greatest accomplishment throughout your life?
Well, you can't overlook family. I look back,
Mm,
we have
mm,
2 beautiful daughters, Jessica and Brenna, and 3 glorious grandchildren, Kimber, Kenna, and Felix. And it is no small feat to raise a family where we all want to, they're all in town except for my one granddaughter, and we all
mm,
want to spend time with each other. And we enjoy each other's company. We're
mhm,
still a family. There's, there
mhm,
are limits, but what an accomplishment that is. I'm so proud of that. And
mhm,
I'm so proud of all of them. But like we were just saying, the hope for tomorrow totally depends on the youth of today.
agree.
And we have always at OpenStage nurtured young theater artists. I think that's why our audience demographic is way below age-wise the national
Mm,
average, because we have always listened to our younger artists. What are the things that excite you? What are the things that you want to do? Or
mm,
where do you think the company needs to improve? But that piece is part of um, what is the theater's overall organizational culture.
mhm,
And when I also worked for Al Yates when he was the president of CSU. I worked for him for 5 years. And one of the first things that he did was initiate an image and culture committee.
mm,
And I was able to serve on that committee um, and communicate with one of the top academic specialists in organizational culture at that time. And that and these leadership practices has allowed us to really um, make our initial vision so much more sophisticated. The reason we're OpenStage Theater and Company is because when we started this company, theater our actors and actresses, performers, were considered a dime a dozen.
mm,
They had no rights. You came, you did the show, you got paid horribly, uh, with very few exceptions. And even then, you were only employed part of the year. And if people didn't like you, they just get rid of you and get somebody else. And the
mm,
idea was, no, this is an ensemble. This is an ensemble. We're a company, and an artist has a right to feel ownership in their work. So we've always made sure that the artists, to the best of our ability, have had a strong voice in the company, and that's become part of our organizational culture, um, which is why we now consider ourselves an ensemble family of theater artists, because these 150 artists who work with us every year, both ones that have worked with for decades and new ones every year, really love working with OpenStage Theater. And when we have guest artists, they go, oh my gosh, more often than not, I've never heard any of them not share, this is what I've always wanted. This is what
mm,
I've always wanted to see, this ensemble. And it takes a constant work. But there is something that I wrote a long time ago that I still really love, that I think encompasses that organizational culture. And that is, we're dedicated to capturing the hearts and minds of our audiences. Our name embraces our essence, as we are open to ideas, genres, and the future. I'm going to get a little teary right now because this means so much to me. The soul of OpenStage Theater and its greatest resource is its artists. We make no distinction between directors, designers, actors, and technicians. They are all theater artists passionate about creating magical and transforming experiences, and each is a valued member of the OpenStage ensemble family of artists. If our artists are our soul, the audience is our heart.
Mm.
They are the lifeblood of our art. Theater exists only in that singular moment created together by artists and audience. This communion, this sharing in the power of theatrical story, gives breadth to compassion and understanding, and ultimately creates a larger community where differences are embraced and conflicts are resolved with civility and tolerance.
Mm. I love that. Was that I love how you took the time to be able to write what was in your heart and your passion in that is the foundation behind Open Stage. Was
Yes.
that something that you read in the beginning of like when a new cast or ensemble came together?
Yes.
Or was it like part of your mission statement that you did?
Well, it is now. If you go on our
Mm.
OpenStage's website and you see our vision and our mission,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then it actually has this description of our organizational culture.
Oh, it's
And
beautiful.
yes, we do share that with new casts, new artists,
Mhm.
because artists are not just the actors, the
Mhm.
performers.
Mhm.
Um, and we share with them because it's very important that we can't. One of the things about changing an organizational culture is it takes a message, a constant message for at least 10 years. And then you have to maintain that message.
Mhm.
And you have the words where it's very clear, but you always revisit it to see if it needs to be
Mhm.
fine-tuned, if something needs to be changed. We added something a few years ago, not very many years ago, just pre-pandemic. That was a result of our artists bringing this forward. We have 3 positions in the company that are elected every year. It's a voting member on the board of directors, the company manager, and the company secretary. And the company manager brought this forward. Um, there was a huge scandal. This was prior to the Me Too movement in Chicago, where it was revealed that this incredibly successful director who had won numerous awards was sexually
Mm.
very abusive. And it was a huge scandal. And we heard about this scandal, and so we started researching what is now called our practices, standards and practices. And as it was a committee comprised of artists, company officers, and board members. They did a lot of national research, and what we found was that there really was no document like this, except it had just come out of Chicago. Their community got together because of this scandal and wrote this document, which is a living, breathing, changing document.
Mm.
And so when we researched other theaters, major theaters throughout the country, and found nobody had a policy
Mm.
for abusive relationships. So except for Chicago, and Chicago said, well, here's our document, do with it what you will. And that's what we did. We adapted it to our specific
Mm.
situation. And then when the Colorado Theater Guild, which is the organization that's sort of, it's not really an umbrella, but it involves all the theaters throughout the states. A few years later, when they were working on it, they came to us and we said, well, this is what we have. Do with it what you will. And that's just the way that's getting out. And we have paths if you have a problem, and it's all the way from something so severe, truly severe, to
Mhm.
maybe something that's minor.
Mm.
And again, it's part of the organizational culture of these are our protocols. This is how we treat each other. It's how we respect each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking back, who were some of your role models growing up and how did they impact your life?
Well, my two major theater teachers, Joyce Nordstrom in high school, that led me to um, going to CSU in theater. And Dr. Ron Willis was my advisor and the head of the theater program here at that time. Young man, I thought he was just all grown up, right? He was like 33, riding his motorcycle around campus. But so Yale graduate, has his doctorate, I believe, from Yale, and was just so knowledgeable. And he was only here for about 3 years, but it was when the theater scene was exploding nationally as well. There was very little really professional theater anywhere in the United States outside of the coast. And it just, in the 70s, it just really, it blew up. And there were all sorts of experiments and different ways of looking at how theaters presented. And he was just on the pulse of that. And I learned so much from both of those people that's really been an inspiration and a foundation for my work throughout my professional life. But also, and I have talked about her so much, Elnora Guilfoyle, who I worked for at CSU. Before she was the head of this institute, she was actually the vice president for academic affairs and the provost at CSU under Al Yates. And actually, when she left that position and started the institute, that's when I said, well, Ellie, would you like somebody to work with you? And that's how I got that position. But I not only learned so much from her about leadership and organizational culture, but she is an icon for me of the qualities of what being a truly exceptional human being looks like. Phenomenal woman.
I love it. I love it. When Patty first reached out to you, and shared her project with you and shared that you were selected as an honoree, what was your reaction? And can you share with any thoughts that you might have about what is receiving this honor of being a Living Her Legacy honoree mean to you?
Well, it not only meant so much to me at the time, but just as we go further and further down this road, it means more and more to me. As I learn more and more about the other women who have been honored or are being honored, both historically and people who are still active in our community, a phenomenal group of women. And it just was almost overwhelming, has become almost overwhelming to know that I am part of that group. But I think one of the initial things that happened for me is that I think as human beings, all of us just want to be truly seen clearly for who we are. And this recognition of her living legacy has given me such a sense of being seen. And that has meant so much for my self-esteem. And it's given me so much pride in my choices and in the life I have lived.
Would you have any great advice? We've talked about the generations and the communion between the generations, but would you have any great advice for a young woman growing up today?
Oh, I think we've sort of said that. You need to know your demons and accept them. And you need to know and embrace and be proud of your talents and your abilities. Oh, and you need to celebrate what you do. Even each little step, each little thing, you need to learn to celebrate. As women, it is so hard for us to talk ourselves up historically. when we talk ourselves up, there's a lot of names that we get called. And when we're assertive, there's a lot of similar and other names that we get called. And we need to know that that's there, but we can't let that define us. And it's the demons inside ourselves that allow us to believe those things that are said about us. Quite frankly, I was in my mid-40s, and then again, this is a generational thing, before I said, you know, I'm not a bitch. And now your generation says, I'm a bitch and I'm proud of it. Right? And those are the things where you go, it's okay. It's okay to be assertive, you know, and if you call me a name, that's about you. I can protect myself from that most of the time. So I think, again, just celebrating who you are, the beautiful things and the not so beautiful things, because we learn more from the not so beautiful things than from anything else in our life.
I agree. And I also believe that we are given things that we can handle, right? We're always given something.
Yes.
We can handle it, right? We can find the solution. So
as much as we may not want to.
Yep. But I agree. I think that you learn just as much from whatever you want to call it, your failures or your obstacles or whatever it is, than the things that have come easy or your wins as well. But celebrate it all.
Absolutely. I have to say, some of the most valuable things I've learned have been from lessons that I have fought tooth and nail. Until it finally was like, give it up, figure it out.
Yeah. All right. One last question for you. Do you have a favorite inspirational quote or saying?
Well, I have so many. I'm going to give you a couple.
Okay.
One is a Navajo saying, which is, as I walk, the universe is walking with me. But then the other one is one of several from Emily Dickinson, because starting in 1980, I performed as Emily Dickinson in the one-woman show, The Belle of Amherst. And over the decades, I have performed that numerous times throughout the state in large and small communities. And this is one of her quotes. I have such an intimate and I have such a respect for her as a poet, and for her intimate and visceral connection with nature and life and the universe. And so this one captures so well all that I love about being alive. Life is short, is it not? I wonder, when one is done, is there not another? And then, if God is willing, perhaps we are neighbors still. I wonder if I ever dreamed, or if I'm dreaming now. I cannot tell how eternity seems. It swirls around me like the sea. And this world is such a little place, just the red in the sky before the sun rises. So let's keep fast hold of hands, please, that when birds begin, none of us be missing.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you.
Natalie, you are a joy. Thank you. This has really been a privilege to be able to do this.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be able to spend this time with you. Denise, thank you so much for your time today and for being one of our honorees.
It's my joy.